Down the rabbit hole, disruptions, innovations, and transformations in contemporary urban studies. Innovations and disruptions characterize the contemporary world. This unsettled landscape points to a new phase in human experience where shifting realities are widely represented in the online world and in the real world. Contemporary civil society is defined and redefined across these distinct but interrelated dimensions. The public square is now literal and figurative. This duality represents a profound change in how individuals, groups, and societies relate and how information is transmitted, received, and understood. We may think of disruptions and innovations as transformative phenomena. They're often associated with accelerated technological, social, economic, political, and spatial change. They can be disruptive or innovative. Often they are both. Today I'll discuss two transformative phenomena that have entered the domain of urban studies with the potential to profoundly redefine paradigms. I refer to these as transcending the academy and progressive politics. Both are communicated and represented widely online and in real life. We may not notice millions of people engaging with these phenomena because so much of that engagement is happening online. These transformative phenomena prompt such a wide discourse online that various perspectives on them are now represented visually. They have generated their own visual signifiers in the form of memes and other digital imagery. My slides today include online signifiers that tell their own stories about transcending the academy and progressive politics. These signifiers are separate from my commentary, but are also complementary to it. I invite you to try and decode the signifiers as we go. While I won't speak to them directly in my talk, I am happy to discuss them later during questions. Now, let us begin our journey down the rabbit hole. Many of you know the name Jordan Peterson. He's probably the most globally famous public intellectual of the moment. His 12 Rules for Life book sold 3 million copies in its first year of publication. Some of you probably think he's a dangerous crank. Some others perhaps enjoy his work but are unsure about saying that in polite academic company. Whatever your view of Peterson, his meteoric rise from university psychology professor to globally prominent intellectual is undeniable. How did Peterson transcend the academy so successfully? His innovation was really quite simple. He used social media to transmit his recorded lectures and talks. He initially used YouTube to host cheaply made in-class recordings of his Maps of Meaning lecture series, and later launched his own podcast. Peterson was an early innovator and has now garnered a massive global audience. His YouTube channel has 125 million views to date. Other videos featuring him or made from re-edits of his source material have also generated hundreds of millions of views. But here's the really interesting part. Peterson's podcast audience is even larger. He claims it's 3 to 4 times larger. It's difficult to verify those figures, though they're not beyond possibility given the enormous global consumption of podcasts, many of which are now made by academics. Podcast analytics indicate the spoken word is becoming the primary means of disseminating ideas and information in the digital age. Vastly more people listen than read or watch. It turns out that video is not the king, audio is. It's not an exaggerated claim to suggest that the audio revolution is a transformation akin to a new Gutenberg press. Human societies are oral cultures and storytelling has always been central. We were listening long before we started reading, and nowadays we're listening more than ever for longer than ever. Long-form audio commands huge audiences, disrupting the idea that the public craves information in easy sound bites. We see this new trend playing out as podcasts thrive while traditional media grimly hangs on. Online broadcasting is a rich and active space. Professional podcasters interview academics, and academics make their own podcasts as well. Joe Rogan, the most listened to interviewer in the history of broadcasting, sources about a quarter of his podcast guests from academia. Some of us are already alert to the power, potential, and reach of online audio. A few of us started producing our own audio content based on our research and expertise in urban studies. Some of those shows are collected under the banner of the Urban Broadcast Collective, which I established with a group of peers at SOAC in 2017. As contemporary urban studies scholars, we also have the opportunity to transcend the academy in ways that were previously unimaginable. This technology is widely available. It's mostly free to use. It's worth noting that YouTube is now the world's second largest search engine. There is essentially no limit to the potential audience any of us could reach through social media broadcasting. We have insights that could resonate with vast numbers of people. The only thing stopping us from transcending the academy is our own willingness to embrace this new Gutenberg press. Moving on. Contemporary progressive politics has taken an extreme turn. This iteration, sometimes referred to as identity politics, is an increasingly extreme ideology that combines theory with activism online and off. It finds resonance with a surprising number of academics and students in Western universities. On one hand, this support is unsurprising given the evolution of postmodern academic thought over the last 100 years. On the other hand, the zealous policing of public expression by extreme progressives is a curious contradiction. Progressive epistemology claims varying degrees of inability of anybody to objectively say what is, yet extreme progressives nonetheless proclaim moral and ontological truths that must not be questioned. The lack of empirical foundation underpinning this ideology was recently exposed in sensational fashion through the grievance studies hoax, which was masterminded by Lindsay, Boghosian, and Pluckrose. Extreme progressives are a loud minority on the far end of the left wing. They use activist techniques on the internet and on university campuses to disrupt events, harass those they oppose, and disrupt norms of civil interaction. They appear determined to police speech, language, and the scope of acceptable discourse in universities and public life. Many reject the very notion of free speech. Academic freedom is celebrated when it enables their ideological preferences, but deemed problematic when it challenges their prescribed narratives. Strong rules and severe punishments to deter deviant thinking are used to police progressive narratives. Deviance from ordained scripts can lead to cancellation. Progressive rage, articulated usually through Twitter mobs, is a furious beast. Its targets have lost their jobs, had their personal data made public, known as doxing, or worse. Academics are not immune from this. Indeed, some of the highest profile victims have been discordant academics. Some recent victims of the mobs include Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying at Evergreen State College in the US, Charles Murray and Alison Stanger at Middlebury College, and Heather MacDonald at Claremont McKenna. In another example, Bruce Gillies' article in Defense of Colonialism was unpublished from Third World Quarterly. The complainants, offended only by the article's premise that colonialism had upsides, mobilized a Twitter storm. They accused the journal of shoddy peer reviewing, prompting an internal inquiry by Taylor and Francis. This found no fault with the scholarly process, yet the article was still withdrawn because the journal editor received serious and credible threats of personal violence. Some of you may have seen debates about this playing out on various email lists that we're all part of. Progressive sensitivities prompted SOAC's sister conference in America, the ACSP conference, to create an anonymous reporting form where aggrieved delegates can document disparaging comments. What is deemed disparaging is undefined. There is no information on how long records are kept, who keeps them, who makes judgment on the extent of sin, and most importantly, on what authority. Meanwhile, the same conference asked all attendees to value the diversity of views and opinions. We may well ask how you can have any meaningful discussion when any comment can be subjectively interpreted as disparaging and then reported on. In short, you cannot. It's because of progressive politics that we had the French report into free speech on Australian campuses. The report was commissioned by the federal government because of concerns about progressive activists trying to shut down guest speakers at universities if they agreed with the perspectives being aired. In America, Donald Trump threatened to withdraw federal funding from universities if they didn't protect free speech. It's not a stretch to imagine a similarly punitive approach could be taken here by the Morrison government. They would probably enjoy significant public support were they to cut funding to universities in response to the perception of the excesses of extreme progressive politics. This form of progressivism is not progressive. It is distinctly regressive and authoritarian. It's becoming a significant threat to all academic disciplines, including urban studies. Online and on-campus activism has caused severe reputational and physical damage to many North American and Canadian universities. Australia is thankfully not at that level, though I submit we would not want to be. Time is still on our side, though perhaps not for long. If we're to continue to innovate our thinking in urban studies, we must reject the notion that extreme ideologies of any persuasion can assume authority to disrupt the standards for discourse. We cannot think meaningfully if we're confined to an intellectual safe space based on the shifting whims of extreme progressives. A mature intellectual environment simply cannot hold if it is not open to a diversity of thought. To conclude, there is no certainty of how transcending the academy and progressive politics will ultimately eventuate within the domain of Australian urban studies. But they are here with us now and they demand our attention. Their implications may be both innovative and disruptive. Certainly they will be profound. Alternating perceptions of these transformative phenomena are subjective and potentially divisive. What is certain is that open conversation and diversity of thought are necessary if we are to successfully steward our discipline through these critical junctures. Thank you very much.